Hey everyone, I'm Sir Wade, and today we're talking about something super fun in animation and how you can add it to your shot. Duplicate limbs and smear frames. Now, I'm going to show you some examples. You've probably seen them before, and if you've never noticed them, they're definitely something to start looking out for. They are in everything, movies, TVs, games. The more stylized, often the more noticeable they are. 2D drawing is usually where they show up the most, especially motion graphics or commercial work. In more realistic stuff, they're harder to find, but you can find them even in things like Star Wars. Lightsabers, when they do this is technically a smear frame. Really, all this kind of stuff comes down to is it's sort of a mixture of spacing and timing or squash and stretch. So what we're gonna do in today's video is I'm going to show you how they work, and then I'm gonna show you how to add them to your shot. I'm gonna show you 4 different methods to do each, duplicates and smears, depending on kind of what you need. Because some of the workflows are easier than others, but maybe more or less flexible than other choices. So you get to pick which ones make the most sense for you. Also, this video is sponsored by Brew. We'll talk more about them in a little bit. Now, we're pretty much gonna think of smear frames as very short periods of time where you're just exaggerating squash and stretch. When you do a ball bounce and you have this frame where it stretches out right before it hits the ground, that's a smear frame. This was invented as a way to compensate for not having motion blur. So movies like Into the Spider-Verse that don't do motion blur use this all over the place. And there's all kinds of different ways that they're doing smears and duplicates. Sometimes you see duplicate copies of the hand and feet. Sometimes you see just straight drawings on the frame. Sometimes you see just eyeballs floating by themselves. There are no rules with how you do this. There is kind of a right and a wrong way to do the duplicate stuff, but we'll get to that. But all of this is just to push the squash and stretch and the speed, the feeling of motion in your shot. Oh, and motion lines. I didn't mention that, but I'm going to show you how to do all of this. Now, duplicate limbs are a little bit different. They're not as much about squash and stretch. They're more about timing and spacing, which I want to do a video just on that topic because that is something that I struggled with a lot when I was a student. So when it comes to duplicates, basically what you're going to be doing is anytime you have an action that goes really, really fast, it covers a big distance or for a very short period of time and you need it to happen that quickly, sometimes it just moves too far, moves too fast for the audience to be able to keep up with it. They can't track the motion because there's only, say, 2 frames to get something from A to B. That's not enough time to actually track the arc that you needed to see. So what do? Well, you could do a smear of something in the middle so that it kind of fills in the gap, and that's kind of the squash and stretch. How would you have animated that thing if you had done it over 6 frames or 7 frames? What would have been the spacing of that object had you had all that time? That's basically what you're gonna cram in, and those poses are just gonna share frames. That's all duplicates are. So it's not randomly placed. You don't just put duplicates along the path wherever you want. You kind of can, but the goal here is to bridge that mental gap between what you see and what you understand. So if something happens over 2 frames, maybe you put 4 or 5 of those poses on those 2 frames, however you want, so that you still get all the visual information about how that object travels and the proper spacing that supports the motion, right? Hopefully that's making sense. That's, in essence, what you're gonna be doing with smears and duplicates, respectively. You can also do both at the same time. You can mix and match. You can do some really weird stuff, like with faces, for example. You can kind of smear the face by duplicating the face. This is a horrifying example with the Animation Mentor Rig Overlord. There you go. So yeah, there are no rules. Have fun with it and just keep in mind like what you're trying to accomplish when you do this. So let's jump into Maya. You can do this in whatever software, but I'm going to show you Maya specifically. I'm going to show you 4 examples of how to do duplicate limbs and 3.5 examples of how to do smears. I think you've got it. Now, before we jump into Maya, let's take a look at today's sponsor, Brew. Brew is the free daily newsletter that keeps you up to date on the stuff you actually care about and want to know every day in less than 5 minutes. For example, I learned about the Black Widow legal suit and how Disney allegedly breached their contract through Disney+. Very interesting and usually something I'd find a bit dense. Brew is instead witty, relevant, and informative, packaged in a succinct email that I think I mentioned is free, which is really nice. So no more aimlessly scrolling social media for hours, trying to find the latest news, trying to figure out what's going on. That means no expensive paywalls and things that pop up in your face and say, would you like to sign up and read our site because your ad blocker? No, none of it. Never again. What better way to get caught up than with lots of little graphics, witty asides, and not big, dense, boring text pages that go on forever. If you're interested in becoming smarter every day in 5 minutes or less, there's no reason not to sign up. It takes less than 15 seconds and it's completely free. So don't be a bad infomercial. Subscribe to Morning Brew. Link in the description. All right, so duplicate limbs, first example. This is gonna be the easiest way to do it, but probably the least likely you'll be able to. With this rig in particular, this Spider-Verse rig, we kind of are doing some smears and some duplicates. This is really easy because all I'm doing is in the rig, there is an arm control, arm ghost, and it has an extra arm. This is kind of a cheat. Like I barely have to include this as one of the options, but if the rig has the ability to have a duplicate arm, that's pretty easy. And all you do is turn it on and off on the frames that you need it. Now what you can do also to make your life easier in these situations, you can take all the data from one arm and just paste it onto the other arm, and then start offsetting stuff and then turn the arm on and off. That's option one, super basic, and very unlikely you're gonna be able to take advantage of that unless you're using a rig that has it. So let's get to something more useful. So method, the good thing, it's easier to iterate on, to retain control over your duplicate limbs. The con, it's gonna be slower to open your file, slower to work in your file. It's just slower on your computer. It's a heavier way to do it. I'll show you what I mean. Hopefully you're referencing in your rigs, so you can just duplicate the reference or reference in another copy of your rig. So I've got the one on the left that's animated. Again, ignore his duplicate limbs. We're gonna pretend those aren't there. You just need to copy paste your animation from one to the other. There are several ways to do this. You could manually grab the values, copy them, paste them. That's gonna take forever. I'm not gonna do that. You could use tools such as Atom, which is an export and import thing in Maya. I've had to use it plenty of times in the past. I'm not doing that. I have Animbot, which I highly recommend if you're doing this kind of stuff. It makes life a lot easier. So first I'll just grab the first guy, and I'm not gonna include the global. I don't wanna move them around. So I'll just grab the first guy's animation, copy the animation, then I'll get the second guy, go to his range, and I'll paste the animation. That's a super quick way to just copy paste the animation from one rig to the other. Easy. I'm going to basically grab everything except his arm. I'm going to hide everything on the mesh I don't need. I'm gonna go into the rig. I'm gonna go back to the mesh. Again, I'm gonna go to face, and I'm just gonna select the part of this that I want. Arm, and maybe I'll grab this section of the arm as well. Okay, now I've specifically just grabbed that arm, and it doesn't matter how you do this. I'm just gonna hold shift and then grab everything. It's gonna switch. It's gonna invert my selection. It's gonna toggle the arm off and the rest of the body on. So now I've got the rest of the body besides the arm. Control H, I'm just gonna hide the whole rest of the body, and I'm left with just a floating arm. Now you can kind of see where this is going. I'm gonna go ahead and turn back on the controls. You can see that all the controls are still there. So now I'm just gonna grab all the stuff on the hand that I'm gonna wanna maybe use, because I might need to repose this, and I wanna be able to use all that. So now what I'll do is just do the same thing. Grab what I want, invert my selection to basically everything else. I don't actually want that global one included. Now, because I don't need everything else now that I have selected, I'm just gonna say layers, create a layer from selected. I think that's layer 4. You should name stuff, keep it organized. I'm not doing that. And I'm just gonna turn off visibility. So now, all I have is the main mover that controls the entire rig. So now all I do is I'm actually just gonna move this really quick, just so I don't have them in the exact same spot, and I'll be able to tell them apart once I go like that. So I just stuck the new one on top of the old one, and I moved them separately so that I'd know which one's which. The lower one is the one I want to mess with. So now I can pose this arm however I want. If I need to keep it in a certain arc, if I want to have the wrist kind of break, do a thing, fingers, whatever. And since it's kind of there the whole time, what I'll do is I'll just take the global control that grabs everything, I'll key it on that frame, and then on a frame I don't want it, I'll just move it away. So it will be gone until I need it. It'll pop up into frame, and then when I don't need it anymore, I'll just send it back away. And so now on that frame, I basically just toggled on an arm, and just make sure the camera view can't see into it because that's weird. So hopefully that's not an issue. That's method number 2, to have a duplicate copy of the rig, but hide everything you don't need. Now, this is super great because if I need to adjust the animation at any point, I can always just copy paste the values from one rig to the other. I can repose this at any time. It's very flexible, but the thing is, because I have another copy of the rig, it's gonna slow down my scene when I open it. It's gonna slow down the scene working in it. It is just going to bog down my computer. So if you're on a laptop or if you're running on a not great PC, probably not the best long-term solution, but the flexibility can be very useful. Now, if you need to get like 8 arms all duplicated, you probably should not use this because that's just going to take way too much computing power and that's not great. So let's talk about option 3 now. Option 3 is extracting geometry from the mesh. It's going to be lighter on your scene, so much faster that way. Less flexible, however, to make changes down the road. So pros and cons. It's generally, I think, the way that most people go about doing this in their real shots, because you'll see there's going to be some benefits for it, but let me start over. So since this one on the left already has some duplicates, let's start with the one on the right, the copy that we made. So I can go ahead and show the geometry, and what I'll do is I'll just click the mesh. As long as I select the object that, you know, certain faces are hidden, I'll just say Shift H, and it will unhide the rest of him. It doesn't count for his clothes, so I have to go find those in the outliner. So before I show you how to do the duplicate for this method, I'm going to show you how to first figure out where to put them. It helps if you can figure that out ahead of time. You can see that it just kind of pops up and pops down. You can't really see the arc. If I didn't do this in 2 frames, if I did it over 5, 6, or 7 frames even, what would it look like? I'd have one pose down here, and then I might put another pose right there next to it, just barely starting to move, showing that his arm is just easing out of this position, number 2. Let's do kind of our in-between. The one I have that I can show you is that one. So I know I want to have kind of the shoulders coming up, the elbows kind of breaking down and dragging everything behind. That one is I'm not gonna number them, but that's there. And eventually, if we're looking kind of at pose to pose, I'm gonna have the arm up at the top. That's kind of what I'm going for, and I want it to feel curved. I want it to feel like it has that arc, and right now it doesn't. It just feels like it pops up. So I propose we add the idea of more frames. I might want one in here somewhere in between. So I need a 3. This will be my 4. I'd like a 5, and then this can be, well, I think 6 is technically like, I think that's technically 6. So I'll just go ahead, because I want to have it ease into the final pose. So I'll have this be number 6, where it's basically there. That's 6, and then 7 at the end. So it's a 7 frame thing, and I'm doing it over 3 frames basically. So you can see at the very beginning here, I'm easing out of it, and at the very end, I'm easing into it. I have an in-between somewhere in the middle, and I need to figure out what's going on in these 2 spots, because that's what will keep it from feeling super pointy. I need it to feel linear, or not linear, curved, arced. So to follow what I want here, this is a very small spacing. It's a very small space between those 2. I want a bigger space than that, but I probably want to have the space grow even bigger here, right? So I know I want to favor these 2 poses. So I'm not going to put it directly in the middle. If this is the wrist point and this is the wrist point, I'm going to favor this one, and I'm going to put it somewhere around there so that it's small, bigger, bigger, bigger again, and then it'll slow down right at the end. So I now know that I want to put one here, probably break the wrist back down. That's approximately what I want. And then for this 5th one, I'll put the hand somewhere around here. I don't need to figure out what it looks like. That's just roughly what I want, okay? Now, I haven't looked at this in a while, but if I go ahead and just bring this over here, so if I just come over here to the one that I've already got it done on, you can see, and I haven't looked at this, so this is just, that was me planning it as if I were doing it again. Let's see if I did it that way when I did it before. You have 1, 2, 3, and 4, pretty much spot on. 5 is exactly where I said it was going to be, 6 is there, and then 7. So you have 7 frames, 7 poses condensed into a total of 5 frames. So I've got 2 frames right here and right here where they're sharing the same frames. Your brain is able to take in all the information and put it all together as if you saw them all. And so now, let me go ahead and hide this. If you look at the 2, hopefully the one on the left, you're able to track it a little bit better than the one on the right. Hopefully this is making sense. I hope you're with me with this. Now let me show you whether or not you followed any of that, and if you're like, cool, now I know how to space them, or if you're like, I have no idea what the heck just happened. Don't worry, I'm just gonna show you how to do it now. So to actually pull your duplicate out, here's what you're gonna do. Once you have it posed, you're gonna grab the geometry, and I'm going to duplicate it, Command or Control D. Now what I've done is I've created a duplicate of that entire mesh. It is not a part of the rig. So if I move around, you can see it's just that frame. It's not tied to the animation. You cannot duplicate the mesh in this way and have it retain the animation data, which in our case is good. It's less work, And the next thing you want to do is you want to actually get this out of the hierarchy, because you probably have like the rig asset and you do not want to have it like buried in there. So you can go to edit, unparent, or shift P. Shift P is the hotkey. It'll pull it out. You can also middle mouse drag it out. Doesn't matter. Just shift P, get that object out of the rig. Now you can do whatever you want with it. So I'm going to go ahead and say center pivot, and in this case, the mesh is locked because this is an animation mentor rig. You're not supposed to be able to move the mesh. I'm just going to go to the attribute editor here. I'm going to right click on these values and say unlock attribute. Sometimes you have to do this on its own. I have my whole body. I really don't need it. It's just hold down right mouse click, go down to face mode. Just grab the part that you want at this point, and you could grab whatever you want and just delete it. You could either delete it or hide it. You can pay attention to these values. If I zero this out, it goes back to where it was. And you'll notice if you try to rotate it, it rotates weird. It's doing some dumb stuff. What you can do is hold down the D key, D as in dog, and then you can move where the anchor point lives. So if I want to put this kind of in the elbow, kind of what I have on the other one, if I wanted to do that or something. So I don't have it floating there, I'm going to click on the object, right click on visibility, and say key selected. I can set a keyframe on the visibility. So on frame 3, I don't need it there. I can turn visibility off, key it 4 on, and go to 5 and key it off. And so now, boop, boop, there you go. I do highly recommend, before you get too far away from it, rename this. I have stuff all over my screen, so ignore that. Rename the object. Well, hands, you don't want to have to dig. That's the more common way to do it. You can see how much less data that is in your scene and why that's so much faster in terms of your computer's performance. That's not going to slow down your scene like at all. And if you have a really heavy mesh, that may be the only way you can go about doing it at all. But you can't just grab the finger controls and move it. It's no longer attached. It doesn't have controls anymore. So if you want to repose it, you can't, but depending on your skill set, you could now go into the modeling stuff, because it's just an object. At this point, you could use your, soft selection, and you can just repose and reorient vertices. And so if you are not familiar with Maya's modeling tool set, you're probably going to end up having to I need to change the pose. You need to delete the mesh, repose it with the rig, and then redo the whole duplicate keyframing visibility thing, depending on what you need. The last option for duplicate limbs is extremely easy. It's really clunky. I can show you in like 10 seconds. All you do is make random geometry that kind of looks like it, and then that's it. You can either draw stuff in Photoshop or in Procreate and just drop it in as an image. What I would recommend if you are going to do something like this is right click, hold down, go down to assign to material, and pick surface shader in particular. You can see that if I pick surface shader, it's gonna give you a solid color, and you can actually just color pick whatever you want. So if you just want to grab the skin tone. But if you pick a surface shader, you can just pick any color and it won't be affected by lighting. There's no light or dark or shadow area. It just picks a color. So that's totally an option too. All right, now smear frames. We can go through these way quicker. Duplicates take a lot longer to talk about, so we can just jump right into smear frames. I'm gonna show you 3.5 ways to do it. Option 1, super easy, just use the rig controls. Most rigs you can do this with, unless the rig really sucks and doesn't let you do things. But you can usually just grab stuff, rotate things, translate stuff, fingers, facial controls, and scale things. There's no reason why you can't use scale, translation, and rotation on anything that has those controls built in, even if you're like, no, I only rotate this thing. If it lets you key the translation and lets you key the scale, that might be why. You can break the rig in these cases. That's kind of what this is for. Breaking the rig is not a bad thing. There is breaking the rig in a way that makes it not function, which is usually hard to do, and you can kind of be proud of yourself and horrified when it happens. And then there's breaking the rig for a useful purpose. This is that one. So break the rig, stretch things out, just make sure you key it normally first, and then key it super smeared, and then put it back afterwards. That way you don't end up with long spindly fingers throughout your shot wondering what the heck is going on. Just don't forget what you've keyed and what you have left. But the idea is that if it's happening for just a frame or two and the audience doesn't see it, they just feel it, that's fine. So just use the rig controls, push it, go crazy with it. You can always pull it back. Okay, smear method 2 and 2.5, deformers. This is probably the more technical approach to approach this. You have more flexibility, more control, but also there's just kind of more to worry about depending on how you do this. So I'm going to show you 2 ways to go about deformers. The first is by using a lattice. Go to the animation menus. I'm going to go to deform, and I'm going to create a lattice. That's going to give me this kind of box mesh around it. Now, before I do anything, I want to decide how much control I actually want over this object. If I grab this and come over to the right, you can come into the attribute editor, you can do it in the channel box, you can actually change the value. So right now this is just 4 corners, 4 points, and this is gonna allow you to warp whatever is inside the box. And you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Now, depending on what you need, you can increase this. So if you need more divisions, you can get a lot more divisions, but just keep in mind you have to manage all of this. So if you need a very specific shape, you could totally do that. Super powerful, super flexible. You can do a lot with this. However, there are some cautionary things. You can, but you shouldn't. You cannot just make a lattice and have at it. Let me show you why. What you have to do is you have to right click and hold, go to lattice point, and then you get control over all of these guys. Great. But while you can key this, I have the ability to hit S and key this thing, and there's a key on my timeline. Do you see any transformation values over here on the right? Do you see translate, rotate, or scale? No. These lattice points do not have those values. So if I go to the next frame and I want to put it back, there's no way to zero that out. It doesn't exist. So what do? Well, you decide up front, you plan ahead what you want to do with this. And so if I say, well, I want to move that one, or maybe I want to move just like this whole top layer, like that's just kind of how I want to deal with it. Totally up to you. What you need to do is go to you need to go to deform cluster. And it will create this little C. You're going to do that for everything. So if I have that C that does the whole top row, and then I want to have just one for that, I'll do the same thing. I'll create a cluster deformer just for that one point. Again, maybe I just want to have some for these 4. It's up to you how you want to set them up. So you can actually have 1, 2, 3 cluster deformers attached to this lattice. And those cluster deformers have translation matrices. So you can actually key them properly and deal with them. At this point, I'm just going to grab my lattice, throw it in a layer, and just mark that layer as like reference or something. I mean, technically you don't even need to see it if you don't really want to. But you now have these little handles. You can animate these things and they will control those points on the lattice. Super powerful, kind of messy, requires planning ahead, but you have to also remember the lattice is its own object. It is separate. If you move the lattice, it does happen to move the geometry within it, but it's not actually like parented to it. I can take this and move it, and you'll see what I mean. They're not connected. It just happens to be influencing it. So you have to be a little careful. And if you want to start over, just delete it and you're good to go. Like you just redo it. You can also grab this and do other deformers that aren't lattice deformers. There's all kinds of stuff in here. The ones I'm going to show you are the nonlinear deformers. These are super fun. So really cool stuff. They're older. These will not work if you're trying to go to like a game engine or something. So you can't put these into Unity or Unreal or whatever. So if I want like bend, there is a thing that gets created. This is the actual deformer. And what happens is a curvature. You can see that it actually will give you a representation of what's happening. And then you just kind of rotate this. So the complicated part of these is that you have to kind of deal with this whole spatial orientation of 3D. You have to figure out like which way you want to point this stuff. You can key these on and off. There's bend, there's flare, sine, squash, twist, and wave. You can also animate these for some pretty cool stuff. I'm not going to get super into it, but I will show you that some of them are a little bit more complicated as far as the settings go. So there's like an amplitude. There is a wavelength for some of them. You can kind of see if you go too far, it'll really mess up your geometry. But you can get creative with these things. Maybe this is something, I mean, this like wiggly hand, probably hard to use. I don't know, maybe this is a character who accidentally bit their finger and you have that kind of shockwave ripple effect of like, and then it like, you know, crunches up their hand and their hand like vibrates. Just another way you can do smears, bends, and customize the geometry once you have it separate. I would not recommend trying to do this with the full character. It works fine on top of the rig, like it won't hurt the rig. The rig is its own thing, the deformers are their own thing. They will combine for an additive effect, but they're probably not gonna give you what you want, so you wanna separate out just the piece you need to modify, and then you can do this. There's also a really easy way to do lattice stuff, and it's just from the camera view. There's a script, I'll show it here on screen. If you want that, I think that's a free script. I'll put a link down below, and you can grab that if that seems like something you're after. And then finally, the last method of how to do smears. This is pretty close to what they do in Spider-Verse for the other half of the stuff besides the duplicated limbs. Everything else is just this random geometry. Literally just grab any shape or you could do it either with 3D geometry or 2D drawing. So you can go into Photoshop, you could draw something, you could paint something, and then you could just drop it in as an image plane and slot it into place. that works fine. But if you want it to actually be 3D geometry, just take a plane, take a cube, take whatever you want, shape it into something, and then apply a surface shader to it, and then just color pick from your rig. This is by far the clunkiest method, but it's the easiest method. And sometimes simple is better. You've now seen a bunch of different ways to do this. Some are more advanced, some are like this. And hopefully you can see that while there is some power in being able to use the tools to do very specific things, you can also get away with doing very little. And that's great. And obviously not every shot needs these. If you're trying to go for something more cartoony and you're trying to have something spin really quickly, then yeah, you might like duplicate the mesh a couple of times and just show it. You might include smears with that. You can kind of blend these two together and use them simultaneously to get some really great results. So just figure out what is like the best bang for your buck without going crazy. Save a lot of the complicated stuff towards the end. You don't need to be dealing with this as you retime your shot and rework the animation. Like, don't get excited and start doing this at the beginning, because then you have to deal with this all the way through your shot. Just save it for the end or when it's actually necessary. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to bookmark it if you think you're gonna need this in the future. Share it with a friend who may use it, and drop a like. And if you are an aspiring animator and you're trying to work in the animation industry, make sure you're subscribed and you have the notification bell on so you don't miss new uploads. I'm not just saying that because it's the YouTube thing to say. I'm gonna be announcing some stuff really soon that's very exciting, especially if you follow my channel for a while and you kind of know where this channel started. I promise you, you'll be excited, you'll be super stoked. I'm so excited to tell you. So just, you know, make sure you're subscribed. And if you want to follow on other social platforms, all the links are down below. If you want to join the Patreon for kind of one-on-one help, a lot of the stuff in this video came from somebody that I'm working with in my mentorship program. If that sounds like a useful thing, link to Patreon down below. There's also the studio dailies where I do reviews of people's work, and we do it in a group setting so that you can see lots of different people's work and you can take notes and learn different things. And so anyways, link to the Patreon and everything else is down below. So thank you for watching, and a thank you to Morning Brew for sponsoring this video. Remember that if you want to check out their stuff, there's a link in the description. You can sign up for free. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.